Okay, so for this next little video, I'm just going to show you really quickly. I'm going to plan it a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and start an animation with our pendulum, and I'm going to do a relatively simple one and work through it in these videos so you can just see the entire process. But I know roughly, just from my scene, what I want my pendulum to do. I want it to fly in from this angle, okay, like it's coming upward, and then I want it to kind of dip down and come up, and then kind of settle back into here, and then like do that. Okay, so I know that that's sort of the path I want it to take, right? And so I can go ahead and leave that path. Maybe change my color here a little bit so we can see it differently. And so we'll see kind of loosely what I want my my pendulum to do. I want it to enter kind of at this angle, and dragging the box enter at this angle, dragging the pendulum. It's going to continue to go forward, kind of with sort of the platform face first, right? And it's going to be dragging the pendulum behind it. I want to keep some kind of neat arcs and angles in there, right? When it gets up to this point, it's going to dip, of course, and then when it gets up to this point, I want it to kind of change angles. Okay, so then it kind of goes to something like this, and at that point, the pendulum will drastically overshoot, and then it's going to kind of continue to go up, and that's going to settle right back here, kind of for the most part pretty straight, and that is where the pendulum below it is just kind of going to ease to a stop. It's just going to kind of dangle until it comes to a stop, as this thing just kind of hovers there. At no point is this box that's moving the entire pendulum going to stop completely, but it will for the most part slow down. We will have what's called a moving hold, which is nothing ever dies in space, nothing ever just stops moving entirely, because if you do, when you're rendering it, you'll just get the same pixel rendered over and over again. It'll look very stiff and unnatural. So this is the character we had before. I'm just going to wipe out all these keyframes that we were working on, and I'm going to do most of this animation from my Render Me camera. Okay, so I know what I kind of want my layout to look like. This is actually probably bigger than further away than I would really like to show it. So let's kind of frame this up a little bit more to where we'd be happy with it. So maybe something like this. Okay, and so once I settle on that, I'm going to get my camera set up. Once I like that, I'm going to select my camera, and then I'm going to lock all of my values under the Render Me camera. So I clicked this little camera button to select it, highlight all of that, right click, and say lock selected. And so that means my camera is locked, and if I render from this angle, we're going to get something kind of like this. So let's go ahead and start setting in our keyframes, and we're going to do this in a pose-to-pose method. I mean, I'm going to pose this entire character, every piece of it, every one of them is going to get a keyframe set on it throughout this timeline. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set my timeline, just making a stab in the dark at about 120 frames. Okay, so let's just go ahead and I'm just going to set these keyframes one at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe there, but then I'm going to move it, and I'm mainly just going to move it in these two axes, just so I can kind of, and so I'll start it off screen. Okay, but I kind of know what angle we're going for, and I can always go to my perspective camera if I need to kind of eyeball this a little bit more. So maybe something like this is a good place to start. And so then I can go back to Render Me. Let me scoot it back just a touch more so we can't see it. I'm scooting that back in Translate Z. Okay, so that's our frame one. We have a keyframe on every channel for every controller. Another nice way to work is sometimes using this preset here. So this will give you your perspective view here, and over here we can look at our camera view. And so you'll be able to see them from two different angles. You can kind of flip back and forth, and you can get to the graph editor easily. So let's go ahead and start setting our next control. Okay, hold down W and click, you'll see I'll be able to change the axis I'm moving this in. Right now I'm moving it in world axis, meaning I'm moving it in the X, Y, and Z as they relate to the world. So you can see this little icon down here in the bottom, that's the world. If I hold down W and choose object, you'll see that I can move it a little bit more locally. But that doesn't mean that these values are going to adhere to how the rig was built. In fact, the rig is kind of built to work on the XYZ axis. So if you see if I just move that, so it kind of depends on what you want to do for posing it, but that's just an option. And sometimes it makes it a little easier to move it in one direction. So let's say that this is how I need to go to a new keyframe first. So let's go ahead and just choose, say, frame 20. I'm just taking a stab in the dark. I'm going to move it inward to something like this. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure I'm thinking of every piece of this animation. So I'm posing that out like that. Okay, and if we watch this now, and we're going to pay attention to this camera, not this one. Okay, a little bit of something different than I had planned, because I want it to go more upward than down on this. Okay, so I want it to feel like it's coming into the scene from below, so maybe it would just be easier for me to sort of nudge this down. Okay, and so if I watch this now, okay, so since it's coming from downward, maybe I would actually grab these and kind of rotate them in that direction a little bit to get a little bit more of the appropriate drag direction. Okay, as if it's just dragging it behind it like a tail. Okay, so I'm going to go a little further here, and I'm just going to, let me go out to about frame 50. We're going to go ahead and set this pose here where it's changing directions. Now I know it's a big jump, right? It's a big jump in time and in pose, but it's just going to kind of give us something to build off of. Frame 50 maybe isn't the right place, but I have everything selected. I'll hit S, and then let's just go out here and pose it like that. So I know that I want it to get pretty close up here, and I want it to completely sort of change angles, right? Something like that. And because it does that, I know it also is going to swing the pendulum forward. I don't really want it swinging it off screen, so maybe I won't take it quite so far. Maybe I won't have it shift quite so far an angle either. So now I can use the period and the comma keys, or the greater than, less than keys, as you can see there, to kind of step through my keyframes and see what I have. And so, got that. And I'll go ahead and set my settle key, sort of where the, for the most part, where the animation stops, which is sort of back here, like this. Maybe a little bit of something like this. Okay, so maybe this is where the animation ends. And again, I'll set a keyframe on everything. And so this is a very stiff looking animation again. And there's still some missing information in here, right? So if we go look at our path, we know it goes upward, it goes downward, and dips up into this pose. And it kind of overshoots up and kind of comes down and kind of settles past it. So it goes past that pose and then comes back to it. So that's what we're going to just kind of go through here and sort of set up those keyframes to make that happen. So I'm actually going to pause the video and do some of that, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the keyframes, because it's kind of boring sometimes to watch people set keyframes. Okay, so now back into what we have been looking at here. You will see that if I watch this animation, now we have the ball kind of hitting the key poses we want it to. Not the ball, the pendulum. And so now we're going to just start polishing this. So I know it seems a little early, but let's kind of look at the key poses that we have. So we have first our off-screen pose. Our next is the pose where it first comes up into the scene. the next pose is where it starts to dip down. So there's going to be one in between this, I would imagine, or something in between this where it kind of hits the peak of that and shifts directions. The next one is when it kind of changes directions and goes upward. Okay. Then it kind of continues upward to overshoot that motion and starts back downward. And then it kind of comes back up a little bit and then settles into the final pose. Okay, so these are the poses I have now. Again, I would probably put something in between these. But the next thing we're going to do before we do any of that is we're just going to work on the timing. Because if we watch this, it's really not good timing. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to grab all of these and we're just going to shift the keyframes to where it makes sense. So let's think of it. It's going to be coming in pretty quick at first, right? So it's going to go pretty quick, and then here it's going to kind of settle. And so these first few keyframes is going to happen pretty quick, and then it's going to hit here and kind of settle back. And so that might even be close to the right. I don't know, maybe that's relatively close, but let's go ahead and just grab some of these keyframes here on the end and just start moving them earlier. Okay. And so sometimes the motion itself is actually distracting. And so sometimes we just want to see sort of like popping through the key poses so we can see how it works when it just sort of flips from pose to pose. So think of this as when we were watching our flash animation pop through the images and we were setting up our timing. If we right click now on our timeline and say enabled stepped preview, what you're going to see is it's going to hit each of these poses and it's just going to hold it until the next pose gets there. Okay, and so by doing that, if I watch this video, I can get a little bit more sense of some of my timing, like how long it's going to hold each of them. So to me it feels like it's still holding this one a touch long before it dips down. And so if I go in here and say it's holding this a little long, I can trim that out a little bit. So let's see how that feels. Oh, I was playing it backwards for some reason. So the distance between here and here feels pretty big too. So I'm just kind of tightening all this up, making it happen a little bit more. And so maybe it's not too late. We can still actually go through here and sort of tweak some of these poses. So maybe this one actually goes up a little too high. And we can kind of change that. So let's look at this now. So that's feeling pretty good. I do think that there still needs to be a key pose in between here and here. So I'll probably go ahead and set one of those in. And we can still do that while in stepped preview. I can sort of go through here, adjust this, and really just make it feel like it's starting to dive forward. So if we get that, we can really kind of... And so I also want to be able to do a little bit of something with the these pieces. So maybe I would do a little bit of something like that. And so what that feels like is that the box is changing direction and the pendulum's kind of dragging behind it like a snake. And so now if I watch this, let's see how that looks. So that may feel like it's holding a little long. I also feel like I need to just make this animation shorter, maybe 70 frames. See how that feels. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. Okay, so if I want to take it out of stepped mode now, I can. I can unclick. Basically what I'm doing is right-clicking on the timeline and enable stepped preview, and I click it. If I uncheck it, then we can watch this kind of in its real timing, and we can see that this isn't exactly perfect, but it's not bad. Like we're not too far off on where we're going for. There's a little bit of a hard dip right there. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go through here and I'm going to polish the curves on the base. Before I do that, I want to go ahead and stop this video and I'll just make this, well, no, I'll just keep going on this video. This one still has a ways to go. It's No, I'm going to go ahead and stop it. And that way we can just finish this up in a separate video.